All right, guys, so now today we're talking about factoring. Okay, so factoring is a part of polynomials. So that means the polynomials, we talked before about monomials, binomials, expressions. So now today we're talking about factoring polynomials. Okay, basically that's what it's all about. And we have different kinds of factoring. One of them is greatest common factor. So you're using greatest common factor in terms of, in order for you to factor an expression. Factoring just means breaking down the expression, making it easier to work with. Okay, so we have the special cases that we're going to see very soon. We have the SE method that we're going to see soon. So we have different kinds of, factorings, and then the methods that we have to go with. So now when we take a look at this problem here, using greatest common factor by using GCF, the greatest common factor. Okay, so we take question number 1 here. Question number 1 is 70 minus 10x. So basically we have two terms here. One is 70 and then the other one is negative 10x. So basically what we're trying to do is to pull out anything that we have in common for those two terms. That's basically what common factor is all about. So that means we're trying to get out of these two terms whatever they have in common and the greatest one. That means the highest one. Okay? So when we look at 70 and 10x, so the first thing is 70 doesn't have x, all right, as we can see, and then 10 has the x. So that means they don't have the x in common. But when you look at the 70 and then the 10, both of them, which are numbers, and then in this case, 10 is a coefficient, if you guys remember this terminology. And then 70 here is just a number here. So between those two numbers, what do they have in common, basically? That's what we're talking about. So what do they have in common? 17 and 10, what do they have in common? So as we can see, we have 10. Because 10 can be divided into 70 and 10 can be divided by itself. That's what we call something in common, basically. That's what we're looking for. So 10 and then the highest one, okay? So the highest one would be 10 because 10 can divide, right? 10 can divide 70 and 10 can divide 10. So if 10 divides 70, that would give us what? 7, all right? Minus 10 divided by 10 is what? 1. So that's 1x. And then what happens is what? So that would give us 7, sorry, here. And then you have 10 outside. So 10 is, that should give us 7, okay? So 10 is what we have in common for these two. So 10 comes out, and then you have 7 left, and then you have negative 1x left, okay? And how do you check to see if you are on the right track or not? Is by multiplying, using the distributive principle, multiplying the 10 by the 7 and the 10 by negative 1, and then you get your answer back, okay? You should get the original problem back. So 10 is your greatest common factor. So you take the 10 out. What do you have left when you take 10 out? You have 7 left because 70 divided by 10 is 7. And then for the second term, 10 divided by 10 will give me 1. So you have negative 1x that you're dealing with. So this is basically all, okay? This would be then 10, 7 minus x. So instead of having 1x, because 1x is the same thing as x. So instead of having 1x, you just put x here. So either of these two is fine. At this point, we can keep these two answers, okay? So that's what question 1 is about. Now, question number 2, we have 14x minus 14. And again, we're factoring. And we're factoring by doing what? We're trying to pull out again whatever we have in common for these two terms. So we have 14x here and 14. So there's x here. There is no x on this side. You guys see what's happening? So, but what do we have in common if we don't have x in common? We have 14 here, and then we do have 14 here. So this one is just like straightforward because you have 14 there for both of them. So this is equal to what? So 14 is your common factor. So you keep that 14, you write it down, you keep it first, and then now you open your parentheses. And then whatever left, that's what you put in the parentheses. So what is left if you divide these two by 14 and 14? So 14 divided by 14 is 1x, or just x again, like how we did it over here. So instead of having 1x, we just have x, okay? And then minus, in this case, 14 divided by 14 is 1, Okay, as you guys can see, here we kept the 1. But in this case, we didn't keep the 1 because we already have an x. And like we said, 1x is just the same thing as x. Okay? But in this case, we just didn't say, okay, you know what, because that's 1, we're just going to remove it. No, we don't do that. We keep the 1 in this case. Remember, how do you check your answer again? By taking 14 times x, which is 14x, taking 14 times 1, which is negative 14. So this, again, will be your final answer, in this case for question number 2. So now we go to question number 3. We have 5a squared minus 25a. So 5a squared minus 25a. Again, here we're trying to find the greatest common factor. And then again, we say greatest common factor. That means whichever is highest. So we look at 5a squared, and then we look at 25a. So 5 and 5. So we go with the numbers first. And then we go with the variables after. So we go with the numbers first, 5 and 25. What do we have in common for those two? 5. So because we have 5 in common for those two, because 5 can divide 5 one time, and 5 can go into 25 5 times. Okay? So automatically, you write down the 5. And then what do you do after that? So you go now, and then now, what else do you have in common? So in the previous cases, we only had the number in common. But in this case now, it's just going to be a bit different. Why? It's because now we have a squared here and then a. So because we have a in common, even though this one is a squared and this one is a, they still belong in the same family. And they belong in the a family. Okay, so that's what it means. So they belong in the a family. That's why a has to be a common factor in this case. And then now what is left inside? Okay, now what is left inside, you divide 5 both sides because that's what you have in common. And we learned how to do, this division, previously. So 5 crossed out, okay? Then a squared divided by a. If you guys remember that, what do we do to the powers when we divide in two variables? We subtract the powers. And then we move the lowest one to the largest one. So this is an invisible one here, okay, just to recall. And then this is going to give us 2 minus 1. So guys, remember that let's say a power m over a power n is equal to a power m minus n, okay? So that's what we're using here. So it's just 2 minus 1, which is going to give us 1. So we end up with a1 left, okay, when you divide those two variables. And then now minus, because 25 divided by 5 is what? It's going to give us 5. A cross out, there's no more a, and this is what you end up with, okay? But let me give you one tip here. For the variables, the greatest common factor, for the two variables, you always pick the variable with the smallest power as your greatest common factor. Again, you pick the variable with the smallest power as your greatest common factor whenever you're dealing with variables. So a squared and a power 1, which one is the smaller one? Is a power 1. So a power 1 will be the greatest common factor between those two. All right? Okay. Thank you.